Hi, McClure North. This is Mr. Metropolis, the psychology, crime and law, and American history teacher. And I'm going to work with you guys today and go over a couple ideas because Mr. Williams asked me to talk about social learning and growth mindset. So, first of all, let's establish our objective for today. And we're going to synthesize the components of fostering a growth mindset in ourselves and our learners. And we're going to kind of ask questions. So in this video, I'm going to really pose a lot of questions towards you just to kind of challenge your mind and get your thoughts, because I'm going to talk about how I got my students' perspective on it in psychology, and that's why Mr. Williams has asked me to actually make this video. So I'm going to start way back because I'm a psychology teacher and go way before the growth mindset and the Carol Dweck stuff. I know you guys have heard it, but I'm going to show you a little bit more and maybe try to help us clarify and understand these ideas. Now, Albert Bandura, who created the famous Bobo Experiment, where he punched a Bobo doll and he showed that kids imitate aggression and actually got more aggressive if they saw somebody attacking the doll as opposed to not seeing that behavior exhibited, came up with a very famous theory called social cognitive theory. And this is really the foundation of learning. And I know that you guys remember this stuff from intro to psychology or adolescent psychology or whatever psychology classes you took in college. But I'm just going to kind of do a quick refresher. So social cognitive theory is the interpersonal level theory developed by Bandura that emphasizes dynamic interactions between people, their personal factors, so what we do ourselves internally, and our external actions, their behavior, and their environment, how we learn socially. So putting these factors together, and this later is what develops the growth mindset theory and famous book that Carol Dweck comes out with in the last 10 years. The main ways to create positive outcomes are through our self-efficacy, collective efficacy, self-regulation, facilitation of behavioral capacity, and capability, and observational learning and incentive motivation. So that's a lot. We're just going to go over a couple of big ideas and then get ideas from the experts themselves and kind of look at some possible ways that maybe we are discouraging motivation and maybe some ways we could increase it, and then get your thoughts. So under social cognitive theory, just to be clear, you have self-efficacy is the confidence or a belief in one's ability to perform a given behavior. So students' belief in themselves actually create or achieve a behavior is very, very important. That's their mindset that we always talk about. And like, oh, these guys won't do this or they won't do that. Well, that kind of leads into the question of, as us as teachers, what can we do to foster that mindset, okay? And what are some things that maybe discourage that mindset? And one question I'm kind of asking today is, do grades, do they always foster that mindset or do they discourage that mindset? And we're going to look at the argument of the elimination of the zero a little bit later. Now, collective efficacy is the belief in a group's ability to perform actions that bring about desirable change in the community. We help each other out. We work together as a department in the social studies department. We work together as a school, or especially at North, we're such a big school. We have a lot of components moving, and there's a lot of things turning. And obviously, Mr. Williams and the leadership team is trying to keep this all going. And we have these challenges that are just unbelievable, especially this year with the transition really back to full-time learning from being out of the building a long time. And then finally, you get self-regulation is the big idea we're really talking about with the students, is controlling oneself through self-monitoring. How do we teach that by the time they graduate high school? How do they learn how to self-monitor? How do they learn to set goals, goal setting? That's that mindset that Carol Dweck really sets, that you have short-term and long-term goals, feedback, self-reward, self-instruction, and an enlistment of social supports. So how do we give them the social supports, and if we can't, lead them that way? And this is what we're always trying to do as a teacher. So we're going to look at Dweck in a second, and I want you to see her video, and I'm going to ask you some questions along the way and get your input on what's going on and how do we foster these things. And we're kind of brain thinking here. We're warming up and thinking about what we're doing and kind of really exploring things. So I'm going to play this video of her speech, and it's really cool because it's animated and it kind of gives us a visual And I'm a visual learner as well as an auditory learner, and this will help us see what she's talking about. This is actually Carol Dweck talking about growth mindset, and this is really building on the foundations of Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory, or people call it social learning theory.
In my work, we find that some students have a fixed mindset about their intellectual abilities and talents. They think intelligence is just a fixed trait. You have a certain amount, and that's that. This is the mindset that makes kids afraid to try because they're afraid to look dumb. But other students have a growth mindset. They believe that intelligence can be developed through their effort, dedication, learning, and mentorship from others. They don't think everyone's the same or that anyone can be Einstein, but they understand that even Einstein wasn't the guy he became before he put in years and years of dedicated labor. I'm going to organize this by telling you about a study we did with hundreds of students making the transition to 7th grade. They're about 13 years old. It's an extremely difficult transition. The work gets substantially harder. The grading gets more stringent. The environment becomes less personal. And that's a crucial time. It's a time when many students turn off to school. So as they entered, we measured their mindsets. That is, we saw whether they believed intelligence was fixed or could be developed. We monitored their grades in math over the next 2 years. We also measured a lot about their attitudes toward learning. They had entered 7th grade with just about identical achievement test scores, but by the end of the first term, their grades jumped apart and continued to diverge over the next 2 years. The only thing that differed were their mindsets. Now, let's see why and how this happened. The first thing we found was that they had completely different goals in school. The number one goal for kids in a fixed mindset is look smart at all times and at all costs. So their whole lives are oriented toward avoiding tasks that might show a deficiency. But in a growth mindset, where they believe intelligence can be developed, their cardinal rule is learn at all times and at all costs. That brings us to the second mindset rule. In a fixed mindset, effort is a bad thing. They believe if you have ability, you shouldn't need effort. And if you need a lot of effort, it's a sign that you don't have ability. I believe that belief, that if you have ability, you shouldn't need effort, is one of the worst beliefs that anyone can have. I think it's why so many of our promising students don't fulfill their potential. They go along, coasting along, not trying that hard. The other kids have to try. One day they have to try too, and they can't do it. Whereas students in a growth mindset say effort is what activates their ability. And rule number 3, in a fixed mindset, a setback or deficiency measures you and reveals your limitations. So what we find is that those students in a fixed mindset try to hide their mistakes or run from their mistakes, conceal their deficiencies. But those in a growth mindset think mistakes, setbacks, natural part of learning. It's what happens when you take on challenges. So a fixed mindset gives no way for students to handle difficulty. They may get discouraged, give up, flee, or become defensive, acting bored. Often this statement, it's boring, it's a cover for a fixed mindset. It means I'm afraid to try, or acting out, blaming the teacher or material. How are these mindsets transmitted? We've studied this in a number of ways, but maybe the most interesting way is through praise. For 15 years, we have studied how adults' praise affects students. We undertook this work at the height of the self-esteem movement, when the gurus were telling us all to praise our children's ability, tell them how brilliant and talented they are. But For 15 years, we have found praising children's intelligence harms them. It puts them into a fixed mindset and turns them off to challenging learning. Let me tell you about a series of studies we did with 10 and 11-year-olds. We brought them to a room in their school. We gave them 10 problems from this nonverbal IQ test initially. They did pretty well because they were matched to their age level, and each child received one form of praise. A third of them got intelligence praise. Wow, that's a really good score. You must be smart at this. Or process praise. That's about the process they engaged in. Could be their strategy, their effort, their focus, their persistence. Wow, that's a really good score. You must have tried really hard. And the control group. Wow, that's a really good score. I won't talk much about them because they tended to be in the middle. Now, if you listen carefully to the messages that are embodied in each statement, the first one says, I value intelligence. The second says, I value process. Let's see what happened. First, yes, indeed, praising intelligence put kids into a fixed mindset compared to praising the process. But the most astonishing thing to us was that praising intelligence turned kids off to learning. Because after we praised them, we said, what do you want to do now? Anything's fine with us. You want a hard task you can learn from, but you might make mistakes? Or do you want a task that's like something you're already good at? The majority of kids who were praised for their intelligence rejected the chance to learn in favor of something they were sure to do well on. But those praised for the process overwhelmingly wanted the hard task they could learn from. They didn't feel they were in jeopardy if they struggled for a while. Later, we gave everyone a difficult set of problems. And here we found that those who were praised for intelligence lost their confidence, didn't enjoy the problems anymore. And even when we went back to the easier problems, their performance suffered. Those who were praised for the process remained confident. They saw these problems were harder. Many of them said the hard ones were their favorites. And when we went back to the easier ones, their performance flourished because they remained engaged and they remained learning. A few months ago, we published a study showing that mothers praised to their babies 1 to 3 years of age predicted that child's mindset and desire for challenge 5 years later. So now I feel justified when I intervene with mothers at airports who are telling their babies that they're geniuses. I have the data. So remember, praise process. But it's even more than that. It's convey to children a new value system, not about quick, easy, smart things, but like this. Sit around the dinner table and say, who had a fabulous struggle today? And each person shares the struggle. Or if a child does something quickly and easily, instead of rushing to tell them how good they are at it, we should say, oh, I'm sorry I wasted your time. Let's do something hard. Let's do something you can learn from. Recently, I have fallen in love with a new word, yet. I heard of a high school in Chicago where when they didn't master a unit, instead of a failing grade, they got the grade not yet. And I thought, isn't that great? Because not yet means, hey, you're on that learning curve, you're somewhere. And so if a child says, I'm not good at maths yet, it's like, get back on that learning curve. I can't do it yet. I tried, but it didn't work yet. The more research shows us that human abilities are capable of growth, the more it becomes a basic human right for students to experience that growth, to live in environments in which all students can fulfill their potential.
Okay. So I know you guys are like, Metro, I've seen this stuff a million times, and I have too, but honestly, I need to rewatch it because according to Carol Dweck, she will tell you that she is one of the most misunderstood psychologists to ever live. And her information is completely getting confused, and people are not understanding it on the educational level and at the parenting level. And yes, it's so important. I'm thinking as a father and a teacher that how do I model this growth mindset to my son and to my students? And we're thinking about these questions. So one thing I did is I asked students and class some questions about grading, because I'm thinking grades are very interesting, because grades themselves are very I think we take them to be very objective, but they can also have a lot of subjectivity in them. And if you're evaluating somebody effectively, so I asked them some questions. I wanted to get the kids' points of view, and I think my students took this very serious in psychology too. And I asked them some questions, and I'm not going to do the first ones, but quickly it says, do grades motivate students to learn? And a lot of the students said, no, not really. It actually could do the opposite. And then I asked them if a grade was a true assessment of a student's knowledge and what they have learned. And again, I got some feedback from students that they felt like sometimes it's just if you're meeting the teacher's expectations, as opposed to the grade was really reflecting my knowledge of the content. And if we're not having grades, I asked them, how would you motivate people to learn? And they said by making it fun and engaging, interacting with some suggestions. And I'm going to ask some of these questions back at you, because I think it's interesting to get their side and to get our side as educators. How could we make it more equitable and more focused on fostering this mindset? And I'm going to ask these questions to you as well. But the kids felt like there's a big disconnection from grades and learning, that they don't necessarily go together. And I think the kids are taking this serious that did this. And also the students I have, a lot of them were more high achieving students. Some of them were in like IB classes, and they tend to be pretty serious about their grades. Not all. And one other thing that I'm going to look at now is I want you to kind of look at this article, and I'm going to share a couple articles with you, but I want to watch this video real quick where she explains the math of grading and raises the question of grading itself on a 100-point scale, and if we should ever give a 0. Because as a foreign, I taught AP for many years, and if you've taught AP courses, they have a 5-point scale, and if you even did terrible on something, you still get a 1. It's a 1 out of 5. 5 being exceptional and A, 4 being a B, C is average, and D is below average, and a 1 is just getting an F, essentially no, but you get some kind of credit, whereas there's a 60-point jump between 0 and 60. So I want you to look at the math of this and just think about, how do grades really affect students' mindset? Do they really motivate students? And according to the students I asked, and this is a small group, they said no. And there's quite a bit of research coming out now that grades actually zeros themselves they really motivate people that are really super high achievers, like a straight A student. They really might be like, oh my gosh, I get that one assignment in. But most people, when they want to learn, it's because they're enjoying it, and maybe they're motivated by other things. It's kind of like punishing somebody that's always getting in trouble. How effective is it? Is the point of grading to be punitive, or is it to be evaluative, and to really assess what they've learned? So I'm going to show this video, and I want you guys to kind of process this and see what you think on this.
A question about grading. Let's say a student does not turn anything in. What grade should they receive? I've asked this question to a ton of teachers lately, and here are the most common answers I've gotten. 0. Nada. Nothing. A -5? An F. A K. What? Well, we're going to explore all of these answers and the mathematical consequences of these different scores on a student grade. I'm a math teacher, and I love number lines. When I'm looking at this number line, I'm looking at all of these intervals as being equally spaced. So what does this have to do with grades? Let's label all of these intervals with the traditional 0 to 100 grading scale that we're all familiar with. Let's start with the student who turns in perfect work. Where would they be on the number line? It would be over to the right, that 90 to 100. That's typically an A. So we have B, we have C, we have D. We keep going down 10 points, 10 points, 10 points. So there's our F, right? Well, that's not where we put the F. When we give a 0, we put that 0 way over there to the left on that number line. Look at that. Those nice equal intervals on the right are not continued on to the left. There's our F. Interesting. Well, let's say we continue on with these equal intervals on this number line. So I'm going to go ahead and label each one of these tick marks. Equal interval tick marks with 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0, just to keep it mathematically consistent. So what would each of these bands represent? Well, from 50 to 60, that would be an F. 40 to 50, a G, an H, an I. 10 to 20 is a J. From 0 to 10, that would be a K. So a 0 would actually be a K. Well, I think K stands for kill grade. And I'm going to show you mathematically what giving that 0 does to a student's grade and what they have to do to overcome that. Let's mathematically investigate what happens to a grade when that 0 is entered into the grade calculation. Let's say this is a hypothetical B student. They have B-level understanding of the content. They do 85 work on the first 2 assignments. So we have an 85 there, and I have an 85 here for the first 2 assignments. Up above, we are auto-calculating the grade in that green box. Now, for some reason, they get a 0 on the 3rd assignment. It was late, or a plagiarism issue, or it's just missing. Look at what happens to that grade. It's now down to an F. All right. Well, we know this kid has B-level content knowledge, so they continue to do B-level work. So how many more assignments will they need to score an 85 on until their grade reflects their actual content knowledge? Let's check. We have another 85. Oh, they're at a D minus. Oh, they're at a D. They're at a C. Okay. Oof. They're getting tired of scoring all these 85s, but they still have a C. My goodness. We're still at a C. We're still at a C. We're still at a C. Let's just pause there for a minute. 15 out of 16 scores demonstrate solid B understanding. But because of that 1 0, this student still has a C. Let's try one more. Oh boy. Finally, they're back to the B range. They had to score 14 more 85s just to get to the bare minimum B level in the gradebook. Our students know this. They get in a hole because of some missing work or some zeros, and they inherently know that they may never be able to get out of that hole no matter what, because they see their grade hardly moving because of the math behind the K, or more commonly known as a 0. We're going to look at some more math in a minute. But before we do that, let's take a look at a rubric scale similar to a GPA scale and how that compares to a traditional 0 to 100 scale. We know that with a regular GPA scale, an A is worth 4 points. So let's go ahead and label that 90 a 4. The lowest B is a 3, the lowest C is a 2, the lowest D is a 1. If we continue with these equal intervals, there is 0. There's negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. So if we convert that traditional 0 to 100 grading scale to equal GPA intervals on a number line, that orange 0 we give them is actually a negative 5. We are actually giving a student a negative 5 on a missing assignment instead of a 0. If we just got rid of those negatives and continued on with equal intervals for each grade description of A, B, C, D, F, a 0 should be here. This is where the floor is for the A through F grading scale. But if we still need to report out in our grade book on a 0 to 100 basis, that 0 is called 50. We now have equal intervals for each grade band, A through F. Do we really need all that red area for describing failure when we have a much smaller band in green for describing the range of success? We use this purple 0 as our new floor instead of the orange 0 as our old floor. When we do that, the mathematics of failure is not so devastating to overcome. Let's take that same student again. They start out the same way, 85, 85. But they have that missing assignment or perform very poorly. Let's give them our new floor score of 50 for that third assignment. So the grade did significantly drop. It went from that 85 to a C-. How many more 85s will we need to dig out of that hole? Let's see. 4 more. The F allows for redemption. The K does not. So we went from 14 more 85s to now just 3. And if we think about this in terms of our grades accurately reflecting student knowledge level, this seems a little bit better. I'd like to revisit our 2 grade books side by side. In summary, we have the same student with B-level content knowledge and just looked at 2 different grade books. The one on the left, grade book 1, gives a student a K for a missing assignment, poor performance, or a plagiarism issue, what have you. Gradebook 2 instead gives that F, that 50 floor, if you will, with the equal interval minimum grading method. If we want to compare these gradebooks apples to apples, let's go ahead and delete these 8 assignments that this student had to do to get up to the B level. So if we look at these 2 gradebooks, the question I pose is, which one more accurately describes the student's content knowledge? And which one would we think is more motivational to a student? Just some food for thought.
Okay, and she does a great job in this article, The Case Against Zeros and Grading, of really explaining the math and some of the psychology behind this. If we're trying to establish a growth mindset by giving zeros, and we're really implementing a negative effect on their grade, is grades becoming punitive? Is it becoming subjective? Other questions are, is it a self-serving bias? Is it serving our bias to give zeros and put the accountability all on the student and maybe take some of the accountability off ourselves? Another article I'm going to share with you real quick and then we're done is grades have a huge impact, but are they effective? And again, these are just some points of view, and I'd love to hear your voice.